remember exactly the chill that ran down my spine when I first stepped into the newsroom of Verdado Culta. It was a mix of excitement and fear, the kind of fear that makes you question whether you're truly ready for what's to come. I was about to dive into something I could never have anticipated. It was a cold, rainy afternoon, typical of autumn. Dry leaves formed a brown carpet on the sidewalk, and the wind howled melancholically, like a harbinger of what was to come. The magazine Verdado Culta was known for its courage in exposing society's underbelly, and I, a journalism student, was ecstatic to have landed an internship there. However, the euphoria soon gave way to an unsettling feeling. The newsroom was a maze of cubicles and piles of papers. The air smelled of printer ink and old coffee. I could barely contain my excitement when the editor-in-chief, a man with a severe look and a grave voice, called me into his office. "Anna, we have an assignment for you," he said, throwing a thick file onto the desk. "We want you to investigate a case of corruption in the university administration." My eyes lit up with enthusiasm. This was my chance to prove myself. I grabbed the file and started reading, immersing myself in the sordid details of embezzlement and nepotism. However, something about the tone of the allegations made me uneasy. There were mentions of suspicious suicides and disappearances of staff, all somehow connected to the university administration. That night, I decided to stay late in the newsroom to get ahead on the work. The rain outside had turned into a storm, with thunder echoing like a distant threat. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The fluorescent lights cast strange shadows on the walls, and the sound of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. Each tick-tock was a reminder of time passing, and I felt the urgency to unravel those mysteries. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, echoing down the empty corridor. My heart raced. It must be the janitor, I thought, trying to calm myself. But when the footsteps stopped right at the entrance to the newsroom and the door didn't open, a chill ran down my spine. I stood up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and walked to the door. I looked through the frosted glass, but saw no one. The corridor was deserted. I went back to my cubicle, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I continued to work, but with each passing minute, the fear grew. The file on the desk seemed to come to life, the words suicide and disappearance flashing in my mind like a warning. Finally, I decided it was time to go home. As I was packing my things, I heard the footsteps again, this time more distant. I left quickly, almost running down the corridor, and when I finally reached the street, the storm felt like a blessing, washing away the fear that clung to me. But I knew that was just the beginning. Something terrible was hidden in the university's archives, and I was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking my own life. That night was just the beginning. The feeling of being watched became a constant in my life since I started investigating the corruption at the university. Every day in the newsroom, every interview, every file I delved into took me deeper into an abyss of disturbing secrets. And with each discovery, the shadow of danger seemed to creep closer to me. The next morning, I returned to the newsroom, determined to move forward. My first interview was with a former university employee, a middle-aged man named Carlos. He had worked in the administration for nearly 2 decades before being fired under suspicious circumstances. We met in a discreet cafe, away from prying eyes. Carlos was nervous. His eyes were constantly moving, as if expecting someone to be watching us. "You have to understand, Anna, this goes beyond corruption. People are disappearing, and they're trying to cover it all up," he said, his voice low and urgent. He told me about Anna Paula, a young library employee who had mysteriously disappeared months before he was fired. She was investigating something on her own. "I think she found something big, something she shouldn't have," Carlos explained. His words were filled with fear, and he seemed relieved to finally share his burden with someone. I left the cafe with a heavy heart. Carlos's story deeply disturbed me, but it also gave me a new lead to follow. I decided to investigate the library archives where Anna Paula had worked. That same afternoon, I obtained permission to access the old records and spent hours sifting through dusty documents. It was there, among yellowed pages and scribbled notes, that I found a diary. It was Anna Paula's diary. Her last entries were fragmented, filled with fear and paranoia. "They know I'm close to discovering the truth," one of the last pages read. "If something happens to me, look for the rector." The final entry was smudged, as if someone had tried to erase the desperate words. My head spun with the implications. I decided I needed to confront the rector. The next day, I scheduled an interview with him under the pretense of writing an article about the university's academic achievements. When I entered his luxuriously decorated office, I felt a wave of repulsion. The rector was an imposing man, with a false smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How can I help you, Ms. Anna?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. I tried to probe him about the disappearances, but he remained evasive, his posture growing increasingly tense. "I don't know what you're talking about." "These are just unfortunate coincidences," he stated, but his eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. After the interview, I started noticing strange things. My notes disappeared, and anonymous messages began appearing on my desk, warning me to drop the investigation. The breaking point came one night when, upon returning home, I found my apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but all my documents and notes were ransacked. It was a clear warning: I was being watched, and I wasn't safe. Fear became my constant companion. My days were filled with a sense of paranoia, and my nights were haunted by nightmares of being followed and captured. I knew I was close to the truth, but each step forward seemed to take me deeper into a labyrinth of danger. The tension reached its peak when, one night, I received an anonymous call. "Give up now, Anna. You don't know who you're dealing with," a male voice whispered before the line went dead. My hands trembled as I held the phone. The threat was real, and I knew I was playing a deadly game. The net was closing in, and I knew I was getting closer to the truth. The threats intensified, and my paranoia was at its peak. But the determination to expose the corruption and crimes at the university pushed me forward, even when fear tried to hold me back. After the anonymous call, I knew I needed to be more cautious. I started meeting sources in public places and avoided predictable routines. That's how I met Laura, a former university employee who had worked directly with the rector. We met in a busy park, and she told me about secret documents stored in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. With the location in hand, I waited for nightfall to visit the warehouse. Equipped with a flashlight and a camera, the place exuded abandonment and decay. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and the smell of mold was suffocating. Fear accompanied me with every step, but I was determined to find the evidence. After an exhaustive search, I found a locked room at the back of the warehouse. Using a key Laura had given me, I entered and was met with a terrifying sight. Piles of documents, photos, and videotapes were scattered on the floor. Amid the chaos, I found detailed records of bribes, threats, and even orders for assassinations disguised as suicides. As I was sifting through the documents, I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly, my flashlight illuminating a man with a cold expression and empty eyes. "You shouldn't be here, Anna," he said in an icy voice. My heart raced, and before I could react, he lunged, trying to grab my camera. I fought with all my strength, but he was stronger. I managed to break free and ran for the exit, but the darkness of the warehouse felt like an endless maze. The sound of footsteps behind me fueled my adrenaline, and I knew I was fighting for my life. Finally, I found an emergency exit and escaped to the deserted street. My car was a few meters away, but when I reached it, I found the tires slashed. Panic took over. With no other option, I ran down the street until I found a gas station. The attendant, an elderly man with a wary look, let me use the phone to call the police. "Please come quickly. My life is in danger," I pleaded. The minutes felt like hours as I waited. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting the man from the warehouse to appear at any moment. When the police finally arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I told them everything, handed over the documents, and begged for protection. But the truth was darker than I imagined. The next morning, I received an unexpected visit. Two men in suits, claiming to be detectives, knocked on my door. "We need you to come with us for further questioning," they said. There was something strange in their voices, a coldness that made me shiver. Reluctantly, I agreed to go with them. We got into a black, unmarked car, and my intuition screamed that something was terribly wrong. As the car drove away from the city, I realized we were heading in the opposite direction of the police station. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to stay calm. The men's silence was deafening. Panic began to build inside me as the car entered a deserted road, surrounded by dense forests. "You're not police, are you?" My voice trembled. One of the men finally turned, his gaze empty and ruthless. "You got involved where you shouldn't have, Anna. Now it's too late to turn back." The car stopped in a desolate spot, and I was dragged out. The horror of the situation hit me like a wave. They couldn't let me survive with what I knew. The sound of a gunshot echoed in the forest, and my vision darkened as pain took over. The truth I fought so hard to reveal ended up consuming me. And in the silence of that forest, my scream was just another echo in the darkness, smothered by the relentless shadow of corruption.